Hi, and welcome to learning more about me. Truthfully, you want to know probably by watching this video who I am and how I've gotten here and what my what I've learned around the way. Well, my work history is a journey fueled by passion, curiosities, and relentless drive for innovation. From my humble beginnings, tinkering with computers in the 80s, to spearheading groundbreaking projects in the software development industry, as well as management consulting with the guise of digital um, transformation, I've spent a long history working with working in this industry, trying to help companies grow. And that's always been my goal. I want to help you grow. I want to help you grow. Um, and I wanted you to grow with the mindset of compliance, the mindset of customer service, and the mindset of um, how we can use this technology to optimize the workforce that you have, or the optimize or lessen the workforce you have, if that's the route you go. Um, and the story is a journey of how I've learned or how I've turned this love of technology into a career. So I guess let's start at the beginning. In the beginning, in the 1980s, I was given an Apple II GS computer. And when my father purchased it, it was, here it is, son. And here are some upgrades the guy at the store said were good. So one of those upgrades was a GPU. So that means a graphics unit. Probably one of the first computers that had these types of upgrades was this Apple II GS that he gave me. And he also gave me a printer. Well, the printer was an IBM printer, and he's like, well, let me tell you this. The guy at the store says, this little device called a grappler can be hooked up to it, and then you're able to print. And that printer is a $200 printer. It's a color printer, whereas the Apple printer at the time was $1,000. And you didn't need a grappler; you could plug it directly in, but it was $1,000. And really, ultimately, it's the same printer. Both of them were dot matrix. Both of them were color. The only price difference was it's Apple being Apple, and Apple loves to price things expensively, proclividly. It was Apple, and they believed that their product was superior, and they still believe that today, and that's fine. Um, Not the world's biggest Apple guy, but that's you know, it doesn't preclude me from supporting them, as I've been doing even in my current job. I've been supporting Apple. I just not a big fan of an ecosystem that's that closed. That's just my own personal beliefs brought in, but I I'm a supporter of whatever technology you want me to support, generally speaking. So I've gone from upgrading my first computer in the 90s or in the 80s, um, to in high school I was playing a little bit on AOL and doing a lot of chat rooms and chat discussions. Um, and in high school, late in high school, I started working at Computer City, and um, I started working on the sales floor, believe it or not. And I was a pretty shy kid, so it was good for me to start learning how to deal with customers and people in the real world. From there, I ended up moving on to CompUSA, and CompUSA, I had bought me I bought my first computer. It was a Sony Vaio, um, and with that I was playing a lot of video games. Not only that, but using it for the internet and other technological advancements, including learning things like, hey, how can I upgrade this? um, so I was upgrading these computers, and brought me to a point where I could go work in the upgrades and computer repair department at CompUSA, and they taught me a lot of things about computers that I didn't necessarily know. I could spew off the technology and explain to customers what the differences were between these computers and their reliability factors. But what I couldn't do is necessarily repair them until I started working in that department. At the same time, I was hanging out, on the sales floor with one of my coworkers, and he's like, there's another really cool thing that you can do with these games that we have. And while I was aware we could do things like back in the Doom and what was Wolfenstein era, this was Windows 3.1. We could network these computers together. I didn't know how to do it. He's like, yeah, well, I'll come over to my house and I'll teach you. And he was throwing LAN parties on the weekends. So ultimately, what he did was he taught me how to use TCP/IP and set up file servers and use that network protocol technology to make computers talk to each other, which was something I didn't know how to do. With that, I took some MCSE classes, and I went to college. And at college, I became one of the network admins. We were running Novell NetWare, so we had to use a combination of TCP/IP and Novell Talk to make the computers talk. That was a total failure of an operating system or operating infrastructure, in my opinion, looking back on it. From there, I ended up becoming a junior IT director working for a software development firm that did GIS here in Atlanta. And they would take satellite images and get those images and turn them into GPS coordinates. And they could tell you how dense the forests were in certain areas. All kinds of stuff when it comes to maps, basically. Different types of maps. Their software was specialized in that. But the coolest thing that they could do was they could take a satellite image of a city, and then they could actually convert it into, this is in the 90s, late 90s, they could convert it into a 3D image that you were actually able to fly through, which was, to me, at the time, the coolest thing, because this is a real live satellite image, and here's the real technology. While we did have flight sims, nothing could beat what is a real city layout at the time. Ultimately, this is the same technology that Google Earth uses or still uses today. And so it's still kind of cool that we were on the forefront of this. When I was working for this company, we did some really cool things. One of them was we were running Exchange, so we were one of the first companies to really use Blackberries. And I mean, Blackberries, they were not a phone. They were literally a device about this big. It wasn't a lot thicker than this. And all it was a little screen with a keyboard, and you could scroll through and get to your inbox and get to each mailbox message, and you can use that little scroll button, press reply, which was fascinating stuff at the time. And we were one of the first companies to deploy PPP-TP protocol, which allowed our salespeople to dial in and access our CRM system at the time, which was Onyx, which we were one of the first ones to use that CRM. And with the VPN technology being in place, they were able to access these databases, not quite real time because they didn't have cell phones that would connect to their computers, but as long as they had Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi was there, they could connect and update customer information, which we were pretty cutting edge at that time, given the fact we were a small little software company. And the last thing that we were able to do was we were running a gigabit backplane. While gigabit backplanes were available to us, they weren't affordable. So what we had done was we had taken some HP ProCurves, which these were new switches at the time. We were able to take they were modular, and you could buy cards stuck in there, and their cards I think had 10 network 10 10 10 jacks in them, and we could take them and make that jack act as 1 gigabit interface. And that's what we did. We had a gigabit interface going between 2 locations in our building, allowing our software engineers to upload data and builds really quickly, and also download them. These innovations at the time were really revolutionary. Well, eventually in the early 2000s, they had a round of, there was some slow periods throughout the, economics of the early 2000s and mid 2000s, as you know. And so I got laid off, and I ended up working in consulting, taking all the knowledge that I had from these companies and bringing it into them. And that company ended up, they had a very, very diverse portfolio, and everything from law firms to rug repair companies and rug cleaning companies to manufacturing firms, to insurance companies. And I was able to, they ended up going bankrupt and closing their doors, and I was able to take all their customers, the ones that wanted to go with me, and I started my own MSP, managed service provider. And when I did that, I decided and these are values I still hold to this day. I needed to do it ethically. I didn't feel the company I was working for was doing it very ethically. They were just charging, everything was extremely expensive. At the time, it really was, but I didn't feel like their hours. They would be like, "Hey, how much time did you spend on that upgrade?" Well, I would spend 10 to 30 minutes on an upgrade, and it would be like, "Yeah, we're charging him an hour." That's not how I worked, and that's not the upbringing that I experienced, and it's not the upbringing I like to portray. So I ran a very, very tight ethical MSP, and we had up to, at different projects, working on different projects, up to 20 different people working on some of them. I continued that diverse portfolio, but I really did specialize more in closing attorneys, which closing attorneys are people that when you close on your house or your business or whatever in the state of Georgia, you have to have an attorney sign off on any deeds that are transferred. That was mainly my focus, but I also ran into customers like a customer who was in logistics. Sorry. And he needed me to set up VPN technology between his office and his offices in the UK. So we had run this proprietary router technology and set that up. And that was really my foray into learning about logistics. That customer, I'd kept that customer from 2008. I worked for him in different roles and different capacities over the years. Including, I helped him deploy some very large warehouses using fiber optic networks, in which I was really the technology portion of his corporation, and I was working directly with his customers to meet their requirements, which included WMS and distribution technology. So I built warehouses for this guy. And when he originally started, it was like a 3,500 square foot warehouse, and he ended up in 2019 when I stopped working with him. He had over 600,000 square foot of warehouse in Atlanta and across the U.S. So he significantly grew with his customer, which is always my goal. I want your customer to grow, and then you to grow with that customer. Um, so that's kind of where I learned forwarding, and a little bit of accounting. And in 2014, I ended up having to. I was wanting a family, and health insurance under the health insurance changes became so cost prohibitive that I ended up saying, why don't I do this full time? And I was given an opportunity to work for Mitsubishi um, as their IT manager, and I took it. And over time, I was promoted. And I say this in quotes because they couldn't give me the title to their IT director. Um, they couldn't give me the title because it it conflicted with one of the titles that they had at their overseas um, headquarters office. And while I did work for the U.S. headquarters in the U.S. entity that had multiple offices across the U.S., it's a Japanese thing. They don't want people to have the same title, even if they are um, a separate entity, where it conflicts with their main entity. Uh, so I ended up becoming their IT director in function and in pay, but I couldn't in title, even though that is what it was. Um, at Mitsubishi, I learned a lot of things. The most important thing I think I learned there was when I acted as boots on the ground, um, I learned more about the company and more about each individual branch than really anybody at headquarters had ever learned about the branches. Um, the way that their management structure is very Japanese in the sense that branch managers are there for a very short period of time, and they come in from Japan and then they leave. So the goal had always been in that company to just make your numbers. Well, if you just make numbers and that's the only thing you do, there's not a lot of oversight uh, in this corporation. So I have acted, and since then I've learned to act as an extension of the headquarters uh, in terms of being boots on the ground and helping establish a message and a standard set of procedures as to how we do things. Um, and with that, I've been able to help these branches grow and change the dynamics of these companies. Not that I'm acting as their direct supervisor, but I'm acting as a guide, reporting back to usually some of the C-suite with what I find, and it's worked out really, really well. I think, and you having boots on the ground and having people visit and spend a week in an office, you'll learn a lot more than just having somebody from that C-suite come in and spend a day and really just see how it's going. A lot of times what I found is the C-suite comes in and really what they want to do is visit the customers. They might spend some time in the office. They don't. Part of it's me because I'm trained on the software. They don't necessarily understand what might be going on in the office. And so when I'm doing digital transformations, I'm getting a lot more information. So I took what I learned with process optimization in my job at Mitsubishi, and manage really ultimately management consulting, and I've taken that and parlayed that into a part of my career and part of my direction. Unless there is an oversight that is present that's really working with the branch, which I've had managing directors, and they are working with branches and can come in and say, this is what we're doing wrong. In which case I take the back seat. That's just the way that is. But I learned at Mitsubishi, I learned a lot more about WMS because I did a 125,000 square foot warehouse deployment of a WMS. And I also did a lot more setup of how we build a warehouse. So after I left Mitsubishi, I ended up going back to my original forwarder, and which point in time they hired a much more seasoned IT director. And seasoned, I mean, this man knew EDI. He did a lot of WMS deployments. He knew a lot more stuff technically than even I had known. And he was able to teach me a lot. And so I was happy to work with him and help him build for a specific customer what we ended up building, even though the customer wasn't ultimately happy about the decisions that they made, which was going with the wrong WMS. But what I was able to build when I went back to that forwarder, future forwarding, was a lot more information about process optimization around warehouses and logistics and things like pick paths and pick passes and all kinds of different ways you can use WMS. In addition, they were running the same ERP system that I've been supporting for years and years, so I continued supporting that. And I utilized, or I was taught a lot more systems than I had seen in quite some time. So, after some hiccups and some unhappy meetings with this customer who had us built a 385,000 square foot warehouse, they went through a little bit of a cutback, and I ended up working for another company where I did yet another ERP deployment of the same system. And from there, I moved back into consulting. This time as a senior consultant doing more of those ERP, but I'm able to use, because this is more of a dedicated job with digital transformation in mind. Digital transformation is a combination of deploying your software and management consulting. And it's really a marriage of the two. And when you're going through this, if you're a CEO and you aren't aware of this, it's important you understand that. Digital transformation involves reworking what people's jobs might be because the software you're moving to might be able to perform a lot of those steps that you're currently doing in your more analog world. And what do you end up doing with some of these people? And what do you do with the people that won't champion the change? So digital transformation is a big change in a corporation in the way that they have been working. And so it's scary for a lot of people. And I've always tried to be empathetic to those changes. But you will run into a lot of people with a lot of opposition. And so a lot of times we have to be friends. We need to be best friends on these projects so that you can help us determine quickly what path needs to happen. And I'll go into that more on my digital transformation discussion, but that was a lot of what I've done at Problem Solved. And we were working with some of the largest freight forwarders in the industry. And I also had a little bit of a prelude or a little a little, I don't know what you want to call it. I had an interlude with FedEx as a contractor, and ultimately, what it turns out is they weren't ready for me. They also weren't ready for digital transformation, even though it was upon them, because they couldn't decide who was managing the project. And if you don't know who's managing the project and you can't make that decision, you're going to have problems with the way that digital transformation happens, especially when you hire somebody who's experienced in doing this, and can see a lot of the problems. So it was brief, but I was able to see a lot of processes that I might not have ever seen before. And so it was learning, a good learning experience. And that kind of brings me back to where I am today, which is I'm 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 the chief technology officer for a company that I set up back when I owned my MSP. I'm working here part time, helping them secure their growing commercial real estate business. By secure, I mean literally put in place security measures that hadn't existed, even though this is a network that I built years ago. They hadn't um, hadn't put an eye to corporate governance as they had grown, if that makes sense to you. And I see that all the time in corporations. Um, by corporate compliance, I really do put an eye on governance and compliance when I'm working with any corporation. This is something I've learned throughout the years. I learn whatever the rules are for whatever industry I'm working. Um, what I hope you gain with all of this information that I've just given you is you understand that I have been working on computers since the birth of them in the 80s. I've grown with them and I've learned the technology along the way, been able to document the technology. Um, and then I can teach the technology. I can help you optimize your company. I can help you optimize your processes. Um, I can work with customers. I can um, I can help you take your corporation in any direction you want me to take it into. And I've got a ton of history and a ton of experience um, that comes along with having someone like me. And we can build your company and make it whatever you want it to be. So I hope you've enjoyed this journey down my history and have learned a little bit more about me and understand I can help you build for the future. And I appreciate your time. Thank you. Bye.